Warning: this story may contain profanity and language that may be offensive to some. Also, don't forget to show the author some love in the comments. Okay, then we begin. Johnny Big Eyes. Written by Ronin Harver. I have to let him in. I've always been cautious, slow to trust, a trait I inherited from my mother. This wariness has left me isolated and has kept me from truly living. For 6, maybe 7 years, I've lived alone on what used to be my parents' property. It's hard to keep track. Time blurs when your life is confined to isolation. My days consisted of working 9 to 5 in my home office, staring at spreadsheets, scanning documents, and firing off emails. The replies came in, but it was impossible to discern if they were from real people or just machines. Everything felt cold, mechanical, and disconnected. Besides the occasional delivery driver, no one ever came to my door. That was until he knocked. I remember exactly what I was wearing, only because of how his eyes slowly dragged over me when I opened the door. "Hello, my name is Johnny Big Eyes." He towered over my 5 foot 5 inches frame, at least a foot taller, standing perfectly straight in his tailored black suit. But it was his eyes, large, unsettlingly large, like something you'd see on a porcelain doll, that held me captive. Oddly, I found them beautiful. "That's a lovely dress," he said, his movements deliberate, almost rehearsed. His hand rose to his chest before extending toward me, a gesture like a man at some formal ball, introducing himself with a flourish. "Did you say Johnny Big Eyes?" He broke into a laugh, a deep, booming sound that vibrated through the air. His head tipped back, yet the rest of him remained eerily still. It was a strange laugh, like a bizarre mix between Santa Claus and a WWE wrestler. The kind of laugh that forced a smile out of me, despite the unease that curled in my gut. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the laughter stopped. His head snapped back down to meet my gaze, and he raised a long, strong finger to his eyelid, pointing at the very thing that made his name so unforgettable. Some names just stick. Without changing the position of his hand, he moved his finger from his face and pointed it toward me, clearly waiting for my name in return. I'm Jen." "Jen? What a lovely name for such a lovely evening." His head tilted in a strange, almost cartoonish way as he leaned closer. "May I come inside?" I froze. It was so forward, so bold, and I wasn't used to that. "It's getting late. No, sorry, not tonight." For a split second, his face twisted into a deep frown, his brow furrowed sharply, drawing attention to those unnaturally large, pale blue eyes. But just as quickly, the expression vanished, replaced by that same warm, almost innocent look he had when I first opened the door. "Not tonight," he said back to himself. Without breaking eye contact, he bowed, one arm across his chest, the other behind his back, then turned on his heel. His limbs moved stiffly, joints barely bending, as he walked away with unnervingly long, rigid strides. "What the fuck?" I whispered to myself in a soft soliloquy as I shut and locked my door. About a week later, I heard another knock. My front door had tall, narrow windows on either side, clouded glass, opaque enough to obscure details, but transparent enough to let the light in. From the shadow that stretched across that fogged glass, I knew instantly it was him, Johnny Big Eyes. "Good evening, Jen." His voice carried through the door in a cheerful, neighborly tone. I watched his gangly arms wave slowly through the glass. "Oh, it is a beautiful night, not a cloud in the sky." I stood 5 feet back from my locked door, heart racing. The last rays of the setting sun streamed through the windows, casting long, distorted shadows on the floor. His silhouette stretched with the light, unnaturally elongated and warped. "I know you are there, Jen." His voice softened, but the way it cut through the door sent a shiver down my spine. "I know how lonely you are." I felt my skin go cold as I took an unsteady step backward. "Just let me in, Jen. I can change everything. For the better." His voice lowered, dripping with something darker. "You miss your mom, don't you? Your dad. No one to grieve with." His words sharpened, a bitter edge seeping into every syllable. "Just so fucking lonely." His anger seethed through the walls. I couldn't see him, but in my mind, I imagined his pale blue eyes, wide and furious. My feet felt rooted to the floor, my eyes locked onto the door, waiting for whatever would come next. Then, bang! A single, violent slam of his fist rang against the door. The sound made me jump, and a startled yelp escaped my throat. But just like that, he was gone. After that, I called the police. I simply told them that a large man had been coming to my door tormenting me. About an hour later, 2 deputies arrived, slower than I would have liked, but that was life when I lived in the middle of nowhere. The deputies, one a short, stocky man with a thick moustache, the other lanky and bald, wearing a uniform clearly a size too large, went through what I assumed was their standard routine. They asked if I was okay, did a sweep of the area around my house, checked all the locks. Other than a trail of large dress shoe prints leading from the forest, across my porch, and back into the woods, they didn't find anything. "If he comes back, call 911, the mustached one said casually. "Stay on the line until either he leaves or we arrive." And just like that, I was alone again. A few days later, I finished my work as night fully settled in. The sky illuminated only by a sliver of crescent moon. I went about my usual routine, saved my work documents, threw a frozen meal into the microwave, and changed into my comfy clothes. The house felt unnervingly still. I sat down in my living room, where a small love seat faced the TV, flanked by 2 large square windows. Beyond them, the faint outline of the tree line loomed in the darkness. I turned on the TV, then walked over to flip the light switch by the entrance of the room. The moment I hit the switch, the TV flickered off, and the room was swallowed by darkness. Then I saw him, a lanky silhouette at the edge of the trees, barely illuminated by the faint moonlight. His shoulders heaved up and down in a strange, almost childlike excitement, his body swaying with each heavy breath. My heart raced. I edged closer to the window. My fingers fumbled to dial 911, but all I received was static in response. I looked up from my phone, and that's when he started sprinting, full speed, toward my window. A scream caught in my throat as I dropped to the floor and pressed my back against the wall beneath the window. My mind raced, expecting to hear the crash of glass and to feel his long limbs pull me into the night. But there was only silence. Then, a soft, almost polite tap-tap-tap echoed against the window right above me. "Jen, you know that I know you're there." I sat silently, my back pressed against the wall, knees drawn tightly to my chest. Each shallow breath trembled with fear. His voice, soft and sincere, seemed to slip through the window, as if the glass between us didn't exist. "We are the same, you know," he said, almost tenderly. "Well, your eyes might be a bit smaller than mine." He let out that strange, unsettling chuckle. "But nonetheless, we are the same." "We aren't the same," I whispered, my voice barely audible, shaky. "Oh, but we are, Jen." His voice dropped lower, more intimate, wrapping itself around me. "Before I showed up on your doorstep, who was the last person you saw?" What was the last real conversation you had? When was the last time you heard someone else say your name? I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. The deputies, they were here because of me. His voice sliced through my words. You would have never called them if it wasn't for me. You have shut yourself away for so long, so afraid, so lonely, just like me. I clenched my hands into fists, nails digging painfully into my palms. You are the first person I have talked to in a long, long time, Jen. That dress, the way you stared into my eyes. His voice deepened, almost intoxicating. You are not scared of me. You love me. The words hung in the air, clinging to me, trying to take root. No, I thought. This isn't real. This can't be real. But deep down, a part of me felt a crack. The loneliness, the isolation, it was all so familiar. Too familiar. His voice made it all feel inevitable. He had been the only excitement in my life for so many years. You need me, he whispered, just as much as I need you. My knees loosened slightly from my chest as I stared at the dark floor beneath me. I imagined how I would start my routine like normal the next morning, and then the next, and then the next, and then the next. Let me in. Let me in right now. If not, I will leave forever. You will never see my big eyes again. His voice softened, almost pleading. But you can let me in, Jen. I can change your life. I stood up slowly and turned toward the window. He was there, waiting, his face shrouded in shadow. But his eyes, they cut through the darkness, locking onto mine. From his crouched position outside, he rose with an unnatural fluidity, his gaze never wavering. I clenched my fists and swallowed my fear. Any change had to be better than none. Come inside, Johnny. Time slows down when you're staring at the face of death. Johnny stood on my doorstep, tall and imposing. Goosebumps rippled across my skin as the icy outdoor air seeped in through the open door, brushing against me like a warning. His large, unnervingly blue eyes locked onto mine. His body was motionless, but his gaze felt like it was peeling back layers, piercing through my clothes, through my skin, reaching into something deeper. He looked at me like he knew, like he could see every secret, every thought, everything I had ever tried to hide. Though it couldn't have been more than a few seconds, that moment, the instant I opened the door to him, stretched out, lingering in the air like the pause before a storm. I'm still not sure what came over me when I invited him inside. I have never been more terrified than I was, sitting on the other side of that window, heart pounding, waiting for him to make his next move. I was scared because of him, because of what he might do, because of what I felt he was capable of. But at some point, something shifted inside me. My heart had never beat like that before. Never. Not once in my entire life. The fear of never seeing him again, of being swallowed up by my mundane life without him, became far worse than the terror of whatever he had planned for me, for us. Good evening, Jen. Without hesitation, he walked past me through the doorway, his movements smooth yet deliberate. He passed the stairs that led to the second floor, flicking a light switch before continuing into my kitchen. I heard the click of my kettle being turned on as I stood there, dumbfounded. The layout of my house was strange. The light switch for the kitchen was almost 5 feet away from the entrance, and I would constantly forget to flick it on. But Johnny, it was like he already knew the place perfectly. After a moment, I collected myself and walked into the kitchen. And there he was, stationed at the counter, his long limbs awkwardly towering over it. He reached up and pulled 2 mugs from the top shelf, a shelf I could barely reach without a step ladder. Yet he did it with ease, not even lifting his heels off the ground. He was making tea. My favorite tea. For a fleeting moment, I felt almost charmed. Then my eyes drifted to the open blinds on the kitchen window, the one directly above the kettle. My stomach twisted, and a cold shiver ran through me. He had been watching me, studying me. "How do you know what tea I like?" I asked as I stood in the entrance to the kitchen. "I know many things," he said as his gaze shifted from the counter to meet mine. "You will come to find that I'm very observant." He didn't break eye contact as he poured the boiling water into the mugs. The steam rose between us, twisting and curling in the dim kitchen light, brushing against the pale white skin of his hands. Thank you," I stammered, my throat dry. He lifted his mug to his lips and drank the boiling water in one loud gulp. The tea bag had barely had time to steep, but he downed it in an instant. Steam rose from his mouth as he set the mug down with force. "Anything for you." He stepped toward me, his movements slow, deliberate. He handed me my steaming cup of tea and his fingers brushed against mine. They were cold despite the heat of the mug. "Drink up." And with that, he walked past me, disappearing into the darkened house. I stood frozen in the kitchen, staring at the mug in my hands, my mind racing. I couldn't bring myself to drink it. Something about the way he looked at me, the way he moved, it felt wrong, like he was putting on a performance just for me. There was something twisted in the way he seemed to pretend to care, his words and actions so perfectly orchestrated. That night, I didn't see him again. Not fully, at least. I lay in bed with the lamp on beside me. There was no way I would sleep in the dark that night. Every little noise made me jump. Each creak and groan of the house sounded like footsteps. I tossed and turned, wondering where Johnny might be, or if he was even still in the house. And then I saw them. Two large, glistening eyes peeked out from behind the narrow crack of my closet door. They were barely visible, positioned low to the ground, and illuminated only by the soft glow of the lamp. They blinked slowly, wide and brimming with some kind of dark excitement. I didn't sleep that night, and neither did Johnny. In the days that followed, life took on a strange semblance of normalcy. Sleeping became somewhat easier as the days passed. I never saw Johnny sleep. Most nights I didn't see him at all, but there were always signs of him. Sometimes I'd wake to find the lamp I left on turned off, or my comforter folded back, exposing the bottoms of my legs, or a strange, rotten pumpkin smell lingering on my fingertips. I started to notice little things around the house too. My laundry would be freshly washed and folded, dishes would be cleaned and put away, and the curtains over the bathroom window were always open, no matter how many times I closed them. I still worked my usual hours, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, in my small windowless office. Shadows would pass beneath the door, small ones like feet, and sometimes a larger shape like someone crouching, peering under. But every time I opened the door, there was nothing. This went on for weeks. Johnny would appear suddenly, his voice low and almost affectionate, whispering compliments before disappearing into a dark corner. Chores I planned were always done before I could do them. My favorite clothes laid out for me each day. Family pictures, photo albums, pieces of my life began to vanish. Johnny was an eerie, strangely helpful presence in my home. But then something changed. He stopped sneaking around. I woke up to the warmth of his breath against my neck. I shot upright, my heart pounded, and my fingertips tingled as adrenaline surged through me. The room was dark, the air sharp and cold. A window I knew I hadn't left open was now letting in the harsh fall breeze. I reached for the lamp on my bedside table, but it wouldn't turn on. Panic clawed at my chest as I swung my legs out of bed, the cold hardwood biting the soles of my feet. The second floor of my house was a long hallway. My bedroom at one end, the bathroom at the other, with guest rooms and closets in between. Slowly, I creaked my door open and peered into the dark, icy hallway. The whole house felt frozen. Every window was open, and the wind howled as it swept through the house. I flipped the hallway light switch, but nothing happened. I made my way down the dark hallway and shut each window as I passed. I reached the bathroom next to the stairs and shut the window above the toilet. Letting out a shaky sigh, I closed the bathroom door behind me and sat down to pee, momentarily forgetting the reason I'd woken up in the first place. After washing my hands, I opened the bathroom door and my blood turned to ice. At the far end of the hallway, barely visible in the dimness, Johnny stood in front of my bedroom door. His hands were shoved deep into the pockets of his suit pants. His shoulders heaved with that same unsettling childlike excitement. Moan-like giggles slipped through his labored breaths. The wind seemed to die down for just a moment, and all I could hear was his breathing, heavy and increasingly rapid as it echoed through the hallway. And then, suddenly, the sound was drowned out by the slap of his bare feet against the hardwood as he sprinted toward me, hands still stuffed in his pockets. My body seized up, and a pathetic whimper escaped my lips. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place. He reached me in seconds. His hands shot out of his pockets and grabbed my face. His icy fingers dug into my cheeks. He pulled himself closer. His wild, bloodshot eyes met mine, and his breath reeked of rotten pumpkin. "I am so cold," he whispered, through clenched teeth. His eyes darted toward my open mouth, a strange longing in them. Without warning, he shoved me aside, rushing into the bathroom and slamming the door behind him. A moment later, I heard the shower turn on. I didn't sleep for hours that night. I lay in bed, my body stiff with fear, listening to the shower run as I tossed and turned, unable to shake the rancid stench of his breath from my mind. When I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, I woke in the morning to find my sheets drenched and the damp imprint of a body beside me. My heart flutters each time he touches me. Both my parents died several years before Johnny first appeared in my life. Growing up, it was always just the three of us. I remember the mess they were in when I moved away for college. My mom wiping my dad's snot bubbles as they hugged me, telling me how proud they were, how courageous I was. Just 1 year later, at the beginning of my second year, I got the call. Both of them were gone. Car accident. Cause unknown. My entire world shattered in a 2-minute phone call. I took the first flight home as fast as I could. But by the time I got back, I realized there was no reason to rush. All that was waiting for me was an empty house, full of echoes and memories. Empty shoes in the closet, an unmade bed, the lingering scent of my dad's aftershave. Everything I had loved, everything that had shaped my childhood, had become nothing but reminders of the people I had lost. The months that followed were a blur of tears and paperwork. Lawyers handled everything. After all, it had always been just the three of us, and I was the only one left, the sole beneficiary. People in expensive suits offered their condolences, but they were careful not to get too close, tidying up the mess around me while avoiding the real wreckage. When it was all over, I was left with a house, a lump sum of inheritance, and a grief that seemed impossible to carry. I didn't return to college for my second year. Instead, I stayed in my childhood home, alone. I couldn't bring myself to sell the house, to leave everything behind. Friends visited now and then, but while everyone my age was starting their lives, I was stuck, living in a house I now owned, with an inheritance that could support me for the rest of my life. My motivation to pursue anything vanished. What was the point when the people I wanted to make proud were gone? And so, the years passed. I found a remote job to pass the time, but I made no effort to keep friends or make new connections. I lived alone, ate alone, slept alone, until Johnny came into my life. He was the first person in my bed since high school. Despite his unpredictability, his ominous presence, something different from any regular human, waking up to the imprint of someone next to me didn't scare me. It was something I could get used to. "Johnny, where are you?" I called into the empty room as I stripped the damp sheets from my bed. Within seconds, I felt Johnny's presence behind me, looming over my small frame, his eyes drilling into the back of my head. I turned to face him, gripping a pillowcase tightly to steady my nerves. His face split into a wide, toothy smile, his teeth pure white, almost glistening in the morning light. His eyes were so large that even when he smiled, they remained wide and unblinking. "Good morning, Jen." His voice was light, almost teasing. "Curious you calling for me. You act like you never want to see me. Me and these big eyes." The smile vanished instantly, his face becoming cold, blank. "If you want me to leave..." His voice dropped into a low grumble. "I will not." And then just as suddenly, the smile returned. "No, I wanted to see if you'd watch a movie with me tonight," I stammered, feeling the pillowcase tear under my grip. "After I'm done with work, you and me, watch a movie together." His smile widened, the corners of his mouth stretched unnaturally far. He moved quickly. One hand shot out, pressing firmly against my back, while he bent down and pressed the side of his head against my chest. His hand pushed me in tightly, sandwiching me between his head and his broad hand. "You're scared, aren't you?" he whispered. I stayed frozen, shocked into silence. "Your heart," he murmured, his voice dripping with amusement. "It is beating so fast." Time seemed to stretch as we stood, frozen in that moment. "Do you like it when I'm scared?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Johnny raised his head, his eyes locking onto mine, an inquisitive look crossing his face. "I will pick out your outfit," he said blankly as he straightened his posture. "I will see you tonight." He had never actually hurt me. He had shown me his strength, what he was capable of, but he had never crossed that line. I thought that if I just talked to him, showed him that he couldn't scare me anymore, maybe we could have lived a normal life together. But a normal life wasn't what he had planned for us. After I finished work that day, I returned to my room. My yellow and white polka dot sundress lay there neatly on my bed, the same dress I had worn the day Johnny first knocked on my door. I made my way downstairs, finding the living room empty. I sat on the couch, scrolling through movies. I had no idea what kind of movie Johnny might like, or if he had even ever seen a movie. Suddenly, I heard the distinct click of the light switch. The living room plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the TV. I whipped my head around, disoriented, looking toward where the switch was. But when I turned back, Johnny was already there, sitting on the couch beside me. He sat in an upright fetal position, his long legs pressed against his chest like a nervous child. His gaze was locked on the TV. What kind of movies do you like?" I asked, my voice barely steady. His gaze snapped from the TV to me, eyes wide and filled with that unsettling excitement. In an instant, he jumped from his crouched position, moving toward me on all fours, crawling across the cushions. Even hunched over, he towered above me. I pulled my legs up, pressing myself into the back corner of the couch, trying to make myself smaller. Johnny hovered over me, his face just inches away, his eyes fixed on mine. "Do you want to play hide and seek?" he asked, his voice low, filled with excitement. "I will be it," he added playfully. "If I can't find you in 1 hour, you win. If I can find you, I win." I sank deeper into the cushion, trying to put more distance between us. What about the movie?" I stammered. Johnny's face inched closer, his nose almost brushing against mine, leaving me no room to deflect. "What happens if I win?" I whispered, my voice barely holding steady. "If you win, I will grant you 1 wish," he said, his smile widening. "Anything you want from me, no limitations." "And if you win?" I asked, my voice trembling. His grin stretched wider. "If I win, you let me in." "Oh, let you in where?" My voice came out as a shaky whisper. He pressed his finger against my chest, his eyes locking onto mine. "Here." His eyes really were beautiful. "I could get you to do anything?" I asked, the words almost challenging him. He nodded just slightly. My heart pounded. I squeezed my eyes shut in a hard blink, trying to steady myself. "Okay, we can play." He leapt off the couch with childlike enthusiasm, landing on his feet and clapping his hands together. "Oh, great! You have 5 minutes to hide. I'll stay right here. When the lights go out, your hour begins." He paused, his voice darkening as he added, "Good luck." He turned his back to me and walked to the corner of the room, staring at the wall. 1, 2, 3. I already knew where I was going to hide. There was a small attic space in my parents' old room, a hidden panel behind the headboard of their bed. I never went into my parents' room. I subconsciously avoided it. And Johnny had never seen me go in. There was no way he would know about the attic. I ran loudly into the kitchen, heading in the opposite direction of the stairs, hoping he'd think I was hiding on the first floor. At the far end of the kitchen, I carefully creaked open the back door, grabbing my house key as I slipped outside. The cold night air bit at my bare legs. A sundress wasn't the right outfit for that time of year. I ran around the side of the house, trying to avoid stepping on pebbles with my bare feet as I hurried in the dark. When I reached the front door, I twisted it open with my key and snuck back inside without making a sound. I was now in front of the stairs. I'd wasted precious time, but it was worth it if my diversion worked. Moving on my toes, I made it to my parents' room. Maybe 2 minutes left. I carefully pulled the bed away from the wall. The carpet muffled the sound, allowing me to move quietly. I opened the small attic door and crawled inside. Reaching out, I pulled the bed back into place, flush against the wall. Once I closed the attic door behind me, it was pitch black. It was a small space for storage, not tall enough for even me to stand up straight. I sat in the darkness, my back pressed against the wall, dust tickling my nose with each breath. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. 30 minutes. I hadn't heard anything, not a footstep, not a door opening. Nothing. My dress didn't have pockets, and I hadn't thought to grab my phone. I felt around in the boxes that surrounded me. I came across clothes, shoes, tennis balls. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until my hand brushed against a small box of matches. I pulled one out. The urge to escape the suffocating darkness overwhelmed any caution. I struck the match. I clamped a hand over my mouth, and tears filled my eyes. In the flickering orange glow, I saw dozens, hundreds, of my family photos covering the attic walls. They were pasted everywhere, covering every inch like wallpaper. Memories and grief staring back at me. Photos from the albums, from the picture frames downstairs, all removed and plastered in this hidden claustrophobic place. My eyes scanned the walls, my gaze moving over picture after picture, my throat tightening until I couldn't hold it back anymore. A scream tore through me, echoing in the tiny space. He was in here with me, in the corner of the attic, his body bending unnaturally to fit against the ceiling, was Johnny Big Eyes. His lips cracked and stretched into a grotesque smile. His wild, bloodshot eyes bored down into mine. The match burned out. The room plunged back into darkness, and suddenly the stench of rotten pumpkin filled the space. I barely had time to react before my body was slammed to the ground. His large, strong hands pinned my shoulders, and I felt his weight as he mounted on top of me. "I'm going to crawl inside of you now." Cold fingers plunged into my mouth. I thrashed and screamed, my voice muffled by his hand. My eyes bulged as he pushed deeper, my gag reflex choking against his intrusion. His breathing grew louder, more erratic. I tried to bite down, but all I tasted was the rancid, putrid flavor of decay. His fingers began to change, splitting and spreading like roots, burrowing into the lining of my throat. His breathing escalated, breaking into disjointed rhythms, like the voices of many people, overlapping in a twisted harmony. I fought, my body convulsing, trying to throw him off, but my strength waned. He forced his arm deeper, up to the elbow, down my throat. My legs went slack. My shoulders fell limp. He gripped my upper jaw. His fingers curled around my teeth and pulled my mouth wider. He pressed his head to his shoulder, preparing to force it inside. I felt the roots growing, spreading through my chest. And just before I lost consciousness, I heard them. Dozens of voices, children, men, women, all speaking as one. "You have to let him in." The buzz of my air conditioner drives me crazy. I thought moving to the city would change my life, a young bachelor in his one bedroom, ready to take on the world. But surrounded by all these people, I've never felt more alone. I try to make friends at work, but a telemarketing company isn't exactly a hotspot for meeting new people. The most consistent relationship I have right now is with the smell of my neighbor's cigarette smoke, drifting through the vent every morning. There's a knock at the door. A woman. I quickly run a hand through my hair, trying to smooth it, adjusting the collar of my shirt as I pull the door open. She's tall, taller than me. And her eyes, they're enormous, unnaturally so, like the eyes of a porcelain doll. She's wearing a polka dot sundress, and there's a scent coming off her, something like a fresh pumpkin patch. "Hello, my name is Jenny Big Eyes." Thanks for listening. Don't forget to bloody subscribe, or the dream demons might pay you a visit. Sleep tight.